An interesting story. Childhood often brings back our fondest memories. But for the 15 million underage girls married off every year, their childhood is short-lived. Although the act is illegal in most countries, child marriage is a custom that is still often being practiced. Speaking at the international conference in Casablanca in Morocco 2 weeks ago, the General Secretary of the World Young Women's Christian Association, Nyaradzayi Gumbonzvanda, says that although there's been a global push to prevent child marriages, millions of girls around the world are still forced to live a life that they do not want. Now, joining us from Senegal, or Dakar in Senegal, is the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund Senior Child Protection Specialist, Francesca Monetti. Very good morning to you, Francesca. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to you too. Great to be here.
It may be easy to criticize child marriage from a westernized or Western perspective. How, in many tribes and rural communities across the globe, it's a long-standing tradition. Just give us a better idea what this practice means to these communities.
Indeed, in many communities throughout Africa, child marriage is the normal way to proceed when a child reaches 15 or 16 years old, sometimes even younger. And it's been this way for hundreds of years, if not thousands. And there is no real other alternative in these places. And so it's not so much that it's a practice that people choose. It's very much what people just do, the same way that in our countries, people get married after 18 or sometimes much, much later, because that's the way that we do things. You have to remember that in many of the communities in which child marriage is very high, they're very poor communities with very little or inexistent other options. For example, secondary schools just may not exist or may be so far away that they're impractical.
How do these marriages affect boys and girls differently?
Well, they're much more prevalent among girls, although they do exist also among boys. So if you look at global figures, you have some 700 million women alive today, 700 million, huge number, who were married as children. And you have 140 million men who were married as boys, as children. So it affects both, but it affects girls in a much, much, much larger numbers. Also because girls typically have a lower status in society, it just kind of keeps them at a lower status in society. It shortchanges their opportunities more than with boys. But if a boy is married early, he has the similar problems. And also if a boy marries a very young girl, who then has her first pregnancy, her first child, say at 15, both children are affected.
Now, Francesca, we're just going to have a look at a map and see where it's most prevalent. But I want to talk about the heart of the matter. The crux of it really is about finances quite often. There's a financial element to it, and that's probably why it affects so many poverty-stricken communities. How do we as the world then overcome this financial issue?
You know, there is a perception that poverty is the main cause. I don't think we have enough evidence to actually show that. What we have is evidence that shows there is also child marriage, but we can't jump to the conclusion that it's because of poverty that child marriage exists. In many, many places where I visited, I was in the north of Burkina Faso last week in the Sahel region, where 87% of girls are married before 18. And what I hear over and over again is that it's not the poverty that's so much the issue, but it's the honor, the question of honor.
Yeah.
There is great fear that if a girl doesn't get married early, she may get pregnant. And that's dishonorable for her and for the entire family. So child marriage often is a means almost of prevention of dishonor. Everybody in those communities is poor. And if everybody agreed that they would all, to delay the age of marriage, they could.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today. That is Francesca Monetti. She is the UN International Children's Emergency Fund Senior Child Protection Specialist. She came to us via Skype from Dakar in Senegal to talk about this issue that affects the wider world.